The conversation around the potential clash between Canelo Alvarez and Terence Crawford has been heating up, with different voices in the boxing world offering their opinions. Many analysts, trainers, and fighters have stepped forward to give their perspectives on the fight, addressing issues of weight, age, endurance, styles, and legacy. What emerges is a debate filled with respect for both men, but also a recognition that this match is far from easy to predict. Andre Ward, the former undefeated world champion, has been clear about the threat Crawford presents to Canelo. He explained that Crawford moving up in weight will actually help him because he will no longer need to drain himself to make 140 or 147 pounds. Ward noted how gaunt and dried out Crawford used to look when cutting down, and emphasized that this extreme boiling down takes a toll on fighters over time. By fighting closer to his natural weight, Crawford will be stronger and have better endurance. Ward acknowledged that jumping all the way to 168 pounds is a huge leap, but insisted that people often overlook how much advantage Crawford will gain by not cutting down as severely. He explained that in combat sports like boxing, wrestling, and mixed martial arts, fighters destroy their bodies for months while training and losing weight, then have less than 24 hours to rehydrate and compete at the highest level. Ward said this is a disadvantage other athletes in different sports don't face, as football or basketball players compete at their natural weight. In his view, Crawford avoiding this brutal cut is a huge benefit. Ward then shifted focus to Canelo and pointed out that father time may be creeping up in subtle ways. He explained that while Canelo remains elite and still better than most fighters in the world, his punch output has dipped and his reflexes aren't quite what they once were. Yet Ward stressed that Canelo's patience, craft, and composure remain his strengths. From his own experience in the ring, Ward knows that fighters like Canelo who stay calm even when losing rounds are very hard to beat. Ward compared Canelo's recent fights to preseason scrimmages, where the real test only comes against an opponent as dangerous as Crawford, whose adaptability, precision, and power could force Canelo to adjust in ways he hasn't needed to lately. Another perspective came from Brian Mendoza, an American fighter in the junior middleweight division. Mendoza leaned toward Canelo as the favorite, not only because of size, but also because of experience. He argued that weight classes exist for a reason and said that Canelo's long career at higher weights gives him a comfort level Crawford cannot easily match. While Mendoza recognized Crawford's extraordinary skill set and adaptability, he still felt that the Mexican superstar has an advantage at 168. Mendoza pointed to Canelo's ring IQ, his history of facing larger opponents, and his championship pedigree as key factors that position him strongly. For Mendoza, the technical side of the matchup may favor Crawford, but the physical realities of carrying weight in the ring ultimately lean in Canelo's direction. He admitted, however, that his opinion has wavered daily, showing how balanced the fight looks on paper. Jeff Horn, the former WBO welterweight champion who shocked the world by beating Manny Pacquiao, also weighed in. Horn warned Canelo that Crawford is a dangerous opponent who thrives on making adjustments mid-fight. Horn predicted that Canelo would try to impose his physicality early, pushing forward to bully Crawford with power and size. This could give him the advantage in the opening rounds. But Horn stressed that Crawford has the uncanny ability to read opponents, adapt, and change styles in the middle of a fight. Once Crawford finds his rhythm, Horn said, he becomes nearly impossible to stop. He argued that if Canelo cannot finish the fight early, the later rounds would heavily favor Crawford because of his stamina, timing, precision, and counterpunching skills. Horn ultimately sided with Crawford, believing that his systematic ability to break down opponents makes him the likely winner if the fight goes the distance. Other voices, however, remained cautious in giving Crawford the edge. Some argued that Canelo's recent fight against John Ryder, often referred to as skull and casual talk, was misleading. They suggested Canelo didn't force the action because he was aware that Crawford was watching ringside and didn't want to risk injury before such a huge potential fight. They interpreted the lower punch output as strategic rather than a sign of decline. The argument was that Canelo simply wanted to secure the win and retain his belts, not chase an unnecessary knockout against an opponent he was clearly beating. Another analyst pointed out that moving up 3 weight classes is a massive difference. Crawford started at welterweight, fought at junior middleweight, and now would be going to super middleweight. This climb means he will carry more weight on his legs and body, which changes performance. Some critics argue that Crawford is not a traditional mover like a Pernell Whitaker, Arislandi Lara, or Muhammad Ali. Instead, Crawford works on angles and counterpunching, which means he will still be within range to be hit. This could favor Canelo, who punishes the arms, elbows, and body relentlessly. They question whether Crawford could suddenly reinvent himself as a fleet-footed mover at a heavier weight when that has never been his style. The expectation was that Crawford would still be there to be touched, and Canelo excels at taking any opening he is given. Teddy Atlas, one of the most respected trainers and commentators in the sport, strongly rejected the narrative that Crawford's performance against Israil Madrimov at 154 pounds proved he couldn't handle bigger opponents. He reminded people that it was Crawford's debut in a new weight class, and historically, great fighters often need time to adjust. Atlas emphasized that moving up in weight is not just about bringing skills, but also about learning new timing, range, and conditioning against bigger men. The body needs time to adapt to carrying extra pounds while maintaining explosiveness. He said Crawford's ability to defeat Madrimov in that very first outing already showed his versatility. With that experience behind him, Atlas predicted Crawford would only improve at 154 and be much more dangerous moving forward. For him, judging Crawford's ceiling based on one debut fight was short-sighted. Crawford's victory over Madrimov also added to his historic legacy. That win made him a four-division world champion and the first male fighter in the four-belt era to become undisputed in two different divisions. This achievement underlined his consistency and dominance across multiple weight classes. Crawford proved that his skills, ring IQ, timing, and defensive mastery translate against naturally bigger fighters. Madrimov's strength was neutralized by Crawford's adaptability, accuracy, and patience, reinforcing that Crawford is not merely surviving as he moves up, but thriving. At the same time, reports surfaced that Canelo had hard sparring sessions with Jaron Boots Ennis leading up to this fight. Rumors suggested Ennis even gave Canelo a black eye during training. Some believe this was a mistake on Canelo's part because he may have left too much of himself in the gym. Atlas explained that he never let his fighters engage in wars during sparring, instead bringing in partners for specific tasks. He argued that going through brutal sparring sessions so close to a fight is like having two fights within weeks, which could leave a fighter worn down for the real battle. This raised concerns that Canelo might enter the Crawford fight already carrying wear and tear from training. Fernando Vargas Jr., son of former champion Fernando Vargas, leaned toward Crawford. He pointed out that Canelo has had nearly 70 professional fights, which is an incredible workload for any fighter. Over time, Vargas Jr. argued, this schedule inevitably drains explosiveness and sharpness. He observed that Canelo's power does not seem as punishing as before, and that the eagerness of his early career is dimmed. In contrast, Crawford has fewer fights, remains highly disciplined, and still fights with hunger. Vargas Jr. suggested that the difference in freshness and motivation could decide the fight, with Crawford's energy overwhelming a more battle-worn Canelo. Debate also touched on Canelo's style. Some analysts argued that we haven't seen the version of Canelo from fights like those against Austin Trout or the first Gennady Golovkin bout, where he showed more movement and different gears. They believe the current Canelo is more limited, relying on jabs and overhand counters rather than versatility. They doubted whether Canelo still had the capacity to reinvent himself or bring out those gears again given his age and the wear on his body. With nearly 70 fights and a career that began at 15 years old, Canelo is considered an older 34 or 35. Analysts laughed about how protected other fighters are in comparison, pointing to how unique Canelo's long career has been. Some worried the fight could end up dull, but others disagreed. They believed Crawford would not come to fight like Caleb Plant or Billy Joe Saunders, circling and avoiding exchanges. Instead, Crawford would come to counter with bad intentions. The only scenario that might make the fight anticlimactic is if Crawford feels Canelo's power early and realizes it is unlike anything he has ever faced before, which could make him cautious. Another thread in the discussion centered around how Canelo's legacy should be viewed regardless of the outcome. Critics often try to undermine Canelo by pointing out that some opponents were past their prime. However, analysts insisted that even if Crawford beats him, that should not erase Canelo's legacy. He has fought champions across multiple divisions and consistently competed at the highest level. The fact that some opponents were not in their prime was not necessarily his fault. Like Floyd Mayweather, who also faced criticism for the timing of certain fights, Canelo still sought out dangerous challenges. Analysts stressed that respect for Canelo's accomplishments must coexist with appreciation of Crawford's brilliance if he manages to win. Canelo himself addressed the fight, explaining that at first he had little interest in facing Crawford because critics would say Crawford was too small. But as the matchup gained momentum, he acknowledged Crawford's greatness and accomplishments. He also admitted that the business side mattered. Mexican versus American fights are always big, and a clash with Crawford at Allegiant Stadium in Las Vegas was a massive financial draw. He recognized that this was his mega fight and a moment for both of them to secure greatness and financial reward. Overall, the perspectives varied widely. Ward highlighted the benefits of Crawford avoiding weight cuts and hinted at Canelo aging. Mendoza leaned toward Canelo due to weight and experience. Horn warned Canelo that Crawford's adjustments could overwhelm him late. Atlas rejected criticisms of Crawford's debut at 154 and predicted he would only improve. Vargas Jr. sided with Crawford because of freshness and hunger. Others questioned Canelo's current versatility compared to his earlier years. Concerns about Canelo's sparring with Boots Ennis raised questions about his preparation. Yet throughout, there was agreement that this fight is close to 50-50, where even small mistakes could decide everything. Both men have never been punished for their errors before, but this may be the first time where even a minor mistake could mean defeat. The boxing world is split, with arguments about weight, styles, adjustments, endurance, age, and legacy all swirling together. What is clear is that this fight has captured imagination as a true test of greatness for both Canelo Alvarez and Terence Crawford.